The Emperor's grace, it is said, manifests in countless ways. Yet down in the hellish churn of his domain's trenches, it is usually delivered with the lethal finality of a lasgun barrel or the sharp edge of a combat blade. However, for those whose agonies have not yet bought them the ultimate release of death, a different, more complicated mercy awaits. This mercy is a tracked machine, slithering through the mire, hauled by servitors whose human frailties have been purged, their old wounds solidified into blessed, uncomplaining mechanical function. It whispers the cold, efficient hymns of the Omnissiah through its vox grills, while in the distance, the buzzing whine of surgical chainsaws performs their utilitarian prayers. This, then, is the account of the fates awaiting the shattered and the ruined. In the 41st millennium, a cold truth reigns. War is no mere continuation of politics by other means. It is the fundamental, inescapable state of existence, the primal condition against which all other human enterprise must be judged. Across a galaxy consumed by eternal conflict where every world is a blood-soaked field and every stellar system screams in pain, the wounded are not granted the luxury of fading into comfortable obscurity. Instead, they are transformed into a managed resource, another critical variable within the vast, brutal equations of survival that dictate every facet of Imperial life. The Medicae stations of the Astra Militarum bear little resemblance to the hospitals that the vanished ancient Terran empires might have known. They are, quite simply, processing centers, triage zones where the totality of human suffering is swiftly sorted and catalogued, judged solely by its potential utility to the ongoing war effort. Here, the critical question is never whether a man can be saved, but whether he is sufficiently valuable that he should be. The distinction between true mercy and cold, mechanical efficiency has been refined to such an indistinguishable powder that even the most seasoned field surgeons struggle to determine where one motive ceases and the other begins. Today, we trace the path of one such broken soul through this immense machinery of calculated compassion. His name is Joric Vest, though by the time his terrifying journey concludes, that personal designation will hold significantly less weight than the Imperial classification code indelibly stamped across his medical data slate. His chronicle, like so many others, begins in the chemical mire and torn earth of a contested world, where the fragile line separating the living from the newly dead shifts violently with every incoming artillery barrage. The planet is Mordian VII, a venerable forge world whose sacred manufactorums have been thoroughly defiled and choked by the relentless, noxious green tide of the orcs. The 47th Cadian Shock Troops have been grimly maintaining the integrity of trenchline Secundus for 16 standard days, although the very concept of a day has become meaningless beneath the perpetual, suffocating overcast of toxic smoke and pulverized ash that blankets the sky. Time is a strange, distorted entity in the trenches. It drags interminably during the protracted watches between enemy assaults, when every shifting shadow might harbor a hidden commando and every unnatural sound might herald another surge of greenskin aggression. Conversely, it accelerates to a terrifying blur when the ground begins to tremble with the heavy approach of orc vehicles, when the horizon is suddenly illuminated by the blinding muzzle flashes, and the air is sliced by the distinctive whine of incoming ordnance. Joric Vest had always been a solid soldier. He was never one of the exceptional heroic figures who earned gaudy commendations and rapid field promotions, but he was competent, reliable, and possessed the steady pragmatism that ensures unit cohesion and keeps commanding officers placated. He had already served 3 years with the 47th, surviving the brutal, grinding urban warfare on Vaxhall Prime and the bitter, protracted winter campaigns on Icenia. He had mastered the essential skills: sleeping while standing, enduring rations that tasted faintly of recycled corpse starch, killing without the slightest hesitation, and obeying all orders without question. These fundamental skills had seen him through dozens of heavy engagements, cementing the trust of his squad and earning the reluctant respect of his sergeants. Yet competence provides no shield against the capriciousness of random chance, and reliability affords zero protection from the sheer, cosmic indifference of warfare. The assault commenced at what passed for dawn, a minor, pathetic lightening of the perpetual gloom that Mordian VII mistook for daylight. The Orc attack was heralded by a massive preparatory barrage from their crude yet alarmingly effective artillery. The deep, irregular boom of big shooters and the ear-splitting shriek of multiple rocket launchers sent every guardsman diving desperately for the muddy sanctuary of whatever cover they could find. The Imperial forces were prepared, having anticipated this very moment. Intelligence had confirmed the Greenskins were massing for a major push, and the chilling undercurrent of resigned anticipation carried across the intercommand Vox traffic was instantly recognizable to every veteran. Joric was currently manning Fire Position 7 Delta when the initial shells began to drop, a heavily reinforced section of the trench network offering a pristine line of sight across the pockmarked, cratered killing ground that separated the Astra Militarum lines from the Orc fortifications. His laser gun was spotless and fully charged, his spare power packs were neatly arranged for instant access, and his gas mask hung readily around his throat. He had performed this ritual countless times. He knew the terrifying rhythm of the enemy assaults, the way they escalated from tentative, probing skirmishes into apocalyptic, full-scale charges that hurled every weapon the Orcs possessed at the Imperial defenses. The initial shells were mere range-finding shots, explosions bracketing the Imperial positions as the crude Orc gun crews calibrated their trajectories. Then came the true maelstrom, a sustained, terrifying bombardment that transformed the world into a storm of pulverized earth, shredded rockcrete, and deafening noise. Joric pressed his body tightly against the trench wall, attempting to shrink his presence to absolute minimum, focusing only on the shriek and thunderous crash of incoming ordnance as jagged debris hailed down around him. This, inevitably, was the most agonizing phase of any assault, the helpless, protracted waiting as the enemy attempted to murder you purely through mathematics and overwhelming high explosives. A guardsman's only viable response was to endure and pray to the Emperor that his specific position was not selected for special, focused attention. The bombardment spanned 23 minutes, yet the subjective experience stretched into hours. When the barrage finally lifted, the immediate relative silence was almost as disorienting as the noise had been. Cutting through the persistent ringing in his ears, Joric heard the sound that every Imperial soldier was instinctively programmed to fear, the deep, rumbling, guttural roar of Orc voices raised in their savage, primitive war cries, underscored by the mechanical groan of their ramshackle vehicles grinding relentlessly across the battlefield. "Contact front!" The shout echoed from somewhere along the trench line, though the deafening aftermath of the barrage made tracing its origin impossible. "Green skins, lots of them!" Joric scrambled out of his crouch and peered cautiously over the rim of his fire position, forcing his eyes to penetrate the drifting curtain of smoke and dust still polluting the air. Initially, he could discern nothing but the familiar wasteland of shell craters and scattered detritus stretching toward the enemy positions. Then, the shapes began to materialize from the haze. First dozens, then rapidly hundreds of Orc infantry were charging across the killing ground, their crude, brutal weapons reflecting the sickly diffused light. Behind them, the massive, blocky silhouettes of their fighting vehicles lumbered forward, coughing out thick plumes of black exhaust and spitting sparks from their jury-rigged engines. The Imperial response was instant, overwhelming, and ruthlessly methodical. Last fire began to flicker and snap from every position along the trench line, the distinctive snap-crack sound of energy weapons punctuated by the heavier, visceral bark of heavy bolters and autocannons. Joric immediately settled into his firing stance and began selecting his targets with careful precision, squeezing off measured shots at the onrushing green skins. His first shot cleanly dropped an Orc boy in the chest, the focused energy beam punching through the creature's rudimentary armor plate and collapsing it in a heap of tangled limbs. His second shot went wide, lost momentarily in the churning chaos of the charge. His third found its mark in the shoulder of a massive orc knob, though the wound was barely sufficient to check the beast's furious advance. This was familiar territory, the steady, methodical execution that had preserved the 47th Cadian through countless engagements. Joric fell into the essential rhythm: acquire target, aim, fire, acquire the next target. All around him, his fellow guardsmen were doing the same, their combined massed fire carving bloody swathes through the dense orc charge. The greenskins were absorbing horrific casualties, yet they continued their advance, propelled by their species' innate genetic addiction to violence and their complete inability to fathom the concept of tactical retreat. The orc vehicles, however, were the immediate critical problem. The infantry charge was merely intended to fix the Imperial forces in their positions, while the crude but functionally effective tanks and battle wagons closed the killing distance. Joric could now clearly see them, a motley, haphazard collection of scrap metal, malice, and sheer spite that somehow managed to maintain functionality despite appearing structurally incapable of supporting its own weight. The lead vehicle was a colossal, ramshackle construction that might once have possessed the chassis of an Imperial Rhino troop transport, though it had been so comprehensively bastardized with additional armor plating, weapon mounts, and inexplicable, grotesque decorative elements that its original purpose was barely discernible. The dedicated anti-tank teams were already engaging the vehicles, their missile launchers and lascannons reaching out with powerful beams to exploit any visible weak point in the crude orc armor. The lead vehicle lurched under several direct hits, smoke instantly billowing from its engine compartment, yet it continued its inexorable, grinding advance. Its primary armament, a massive cannon that looked crudely welded directly to the chassis, swung ominously toward the Imperial lines and fired. Joric never registered the shell that irrevocably altered his life. One moment he was calmly sighting another shot on an advancing orc boy, and the next, the entire world detonated around him in a blinding cascade of light, sound, and lethal shrapnel. The ordnance impacted the trench wall barely 3 meters to his left. While the reinforced rockcrete absorbed the majority of the blast force, the resulting shockwave was still powerful enough to violently hurl Joric backward into the opposite wall of the trench. He landed heavily, the precious lasgun ripping from his grip to clatter somewhere down in the mud. For an eternity he lay perfectly still, stunned and utterly disoriented, his ears screaming with tinnitus and his vision blurred to a gray wash. Then the agony arrived, a rapidly spreading fire that originated in his left leg and aggressively radiated upward through his torso. When he attempted to push himself upright, his left arm refused all commands, hanging uselessly at his side. Thick blood was already tracking down his face from a severe scalp wound. When he finally forced himself to look down at his injured leg, he saw the sickening sight of white bone protruding through the shredded fabric of his uniform. The furious battle raged unabated around him, but Joric was no longer a participant. He had instantly joined that immense, sprawling category of Imperial personnel whose sole remaining contribution to the glorious war effort was their requirement to consume precious medical resources. In the brief violence of one shell burst, he had been instantly transformed from a vital asset into a crippling liability. From a steadfast guardian of the Emperor's domain into yet another broken, flawed component that must now be processed and managed by the vast, impersonal machinery of military medicine. Joric Vest, however, was not yet aware of his new classification. He was still operating under the ingrained mindset of a combat soldier, frantically attempting to rejoin the struggle. He blindly groped in the dirt for his lasgun, attempting to ignore the cold waves of shock and nausea that swept over him with every movement. His fingers finally closed around the weapon's stock, and he attempted to lever himself back into a firing stance. The action sent searing lightning bolts of agony straight through his shattered leg, forcing him to collapse backward against the trench wall with a ragged, strangled cry. It was at this moment that he became aware of the servitor. It approached him through the churning smoke and chaos with the slow, unhurried gait of an entity that had long since surpassed any mortal concern regarding its own safety. Perhaps, long ago, this thing had been fully human, though that time was now so cosmically distant as to be nearly mythological. What remained was a terrifying hybrid of organic flesh and efficient machinery. Its lower body had been replaced by a heavy tracked chassis, enabling it to negotiate the battlefield's treacherous, rough terrain. Its arms were augmented with complex medical sensors and rudimentary surgical implements, and its skull casing housed the cogitators necessary to perform rapid triage assessments in strict accordance with Departamento Munitorum standards. The servitor's multiple optical sensors locked onto Joric with mechanical, dispassionate precision, and its internal systems immediately commenced processing the gathered data. Compound fracture of the left tibia and fibula, probable concussion, lacerations to the scalp and face, possible internal hemorrhaging. The entire assessment was completed in 2.7 seconds, and the resulting conclusion was instantly transmitted to the nearest Medicae station, paired with Joric's service record and genetic profile. Triage category: Amber. Priority: Medium. Prognosis: uncertain. Guardsman Vest, the servitor stated, its voice a flat, dead monotone generated by the Vox grill where its human throat once lay. You have sustained combat injuries. Comply with medical evacuation procedures. It did not require a response. The servitor extended a powerful mechanical arm and drove a needle into Joric's neck, a sophisticated cocktail of powerful pain suppressors and high-grade stimulants designed to maintain wounded soldiers in a state of conscious, manageable cooperation during transit. The effect was almost instantaneous. The searing agony in his leg receded to a bearable, distant ache, and his mind cleared just enough for him to comprehend the servitor's final instruction. Remain still. Transportation inbound. Through the blurring haze of trauma and narcotics, Joric became dimly aware of the other casualties being processed along the forward trench line. Some were the walking wounded, guardsmen with minor lacerations or breaks who could be tagged, given immediate field treatment, and swiftly returned to their fighting units. Others were classified as beyond salvation, their injuries too catastrophic to justify the expenditure of limited battlefield resources. These men received a vastly different type of attention, a swift, whispered ritual of final comfort before the Emperor's ultimate mercy was administered through brutal, direct means. But the largest category comprised men like Joric himself, severely wounded, yet potentially salvageable, their eventual destiny dependent upon the cold, hard calculus of military necessity. These men were being loaded onto heavy, tracked sleds that emerged from the smoke like tireless mechanical beasts of burden, their shallow cargo bays already partially filled with previous casualties. These sleds were creations of pure utility, utterly devoid of comfort. Their design mandate was simple: efficiency and the rapid transport of human cargo from the grinding front lines to the immense processing centers far behind them. Joric felt mechanical hands lift his body and place him onto one of these vehicles, his frame quickly strapped down alongside three other grievously injured guardsmen. One, a young trooper whose face had been horrifically flayed by shrapnel, was weeping silently, endlessly. Another lay rigidly still, his respiration so shallow he might have been dead, were it not for the faint, observable misting of his breath in the cold air. The third man was deeply unconscious, his uniform saturated with blood, from wounds Joric could not distinguish. The heavy sled began to move, its iron tracks tearing and grinding against the shattered ground as it navigated away from the immediate front lines. Behind them, the fury of the battle persisted, the sounds of sustained weapons fire gradually diminishing as they put critical distance between themselves and the killing ground. Ahead lay a wholly different kind of ordeal, a test not of their courage or their mastery of arms, but of their sheer resilience against a vast system that measured human value exclusively in terms of combat effectiveness and efficient resource allocation. The transit to the Medicae station required 47 minutes, though the perception of time became utterly fluid under the heavy influence of the pharmaceuticals flooding Joric's system. The sled followed a designated route carved through the detritus of war, passing the burned-out hulks of countless vehicles and temporary grave markers that dotted the ruined landscape like a grotesque temporary garden. Periodically, they passed other sleds moving in the opposite direction, their mechanical forms already heading back toward the front to gather the next consignment of fresh casualties. The mercy of the Emperor manifests in countless ways, but within the strict confines of Imperial Military Medicine, it is most frequently encountered in the unyielding guise of efficiency. The Medicae station receiving Joric and his fellow wounded stood as a horrifying testament to this foundational principle of efficiency. It was a sprawling complex of prefabricated structures and reinforced field tents, rigorously organized according to operational protocols, refined over 10 millennia of relentless warfare. Every facet of its function was optimized exclusively for the rapid throughput and processing of human casualties, from the initial triage procedures to the final, permanent disposition of those deemed unfit for active duty. The facility encompassed what had once been a small civilian manufacturing complex, its original sturdy buildings crudely repurposed for the grim necessities of military medicine. The main triage center now occupied a former assembly hall, its high ceiling draped with harsh, unforgiving lumen strips that rendered everything beneath them in stark, clinical relief. Endless rows of examination tables stretched across the floor, each equipped with rudimentary diagnostic gear and staffed by medical personnel whose sheer efficiency had been brutally honed by months of non-stop practice. Joric was carefully lifted from the sled and transferred to a wheeled gurney. His progress through the entire facility was meticulously monitored by embedded data tags, recording his status at every stage of processing. His mandatory first stop was the automated scanning station, where servitor-operated equipment conducted a detailed analysis of his injuries, updating his medical file with precise metric measurements and clinical observations. The machines performed their task with inhuman thoroughness and complete impartiality, their sensors cataloging every compound fracture, every laceration, and every deviation from baseline human functional capacity. The torrent of data generated by the scanners flowed instantly through the facility's central cogitator network, where it was scrutinized according to strict algorithms developed by the Departamento Munitorum's medical division. These complex calculations factored in not merely the nature and objective severity of Joric's wounds, but also his cumulative service record, his evaluated psychological profile, specific genetic markers, and the immediate strategic needs of his fighting unit. The output was a comprehensive assessment that would dictate every subsequent aspect of his treatment plan. Primary injury assessment complete. Compound fracture requiring immediate surgical intervention. Estimated recovery time, 47 standard days. Probability of return to full combat effectiveness, 34%. Recommended treatment protocol, Priority Amber, Track Secundus. The official classification system governing Imperial Military Medicine mandates several distinct categories for wounded personnel. Track Primus is strictly reserved for minor injuries, designating those who can be rapidly rehabilitated and returned to active service with minimal resource expenditure. Track Tertius is assigned to the terminally wounded, those whose devastation is so severe that the most resource-economical response is the immediate administration of final comfort measures. But Track Secundus, where Joric now found himself, represented a far more complex designation, a category for individuals whose ultimate outcome was precariously suspended in the brutal balance between necessary medical intervention and acceptable resource allocation. His gurney was wheeled through a complex maze of corridors that linked the various dedicated sections of the Medicae station. He passed the rapid treatment bays where Track Primus casualties were being managed, the sharp, grinding sound of bone saws and flesh staplers merging with the quiet, monotonous hymns that accompany all Imperial medical procedures. He briefly glimpsed the sealed chambers where Track Tertius cases were receiving their final rites, the gentle, melancholic glow of votive candles faintly visible through reinforced viewing ports. But Joric's final destination lay deep within the core of the complex, the surgical suites where Track Secundus casualties underwent the critical procedures that would determine their capacity for future utility to the Imperial war machine. These sealed chambers represented the pinnacle of battlefield medicine, equipped with the finest apparatus and staffed by the most clinically proficient practitioners that military necessity could justify. Here, the Emperor's mercy manifested as precise utilitarian incisions and the mechanical replacement of damaged flesh, overseen by chemical cocktails that deliberately blurred the ancient line between simple healing and practical biological enhancement. Joric's assigned surgeon was Medic Primus Carison, a woman whose 40 years of dedicated service had gifted her with an almost preternatural ability to assess the viable potential of severely damaged human material. Her hands moved with practiced, ruthless efficiency as she reviewed his data slate, her optical augment eye scanning through layer after layer of complex diagnostic information. She had overseen thousands of such procedures, witnessing every conceivable permutation of combat injury that the human physique could sustain while retaining even the slightest promise of functionality. Guardsman Vest, she pronounced, her attention still fixed on his medical file rather than his face. You have sustained significant trauma to your left leg, alongside minor cranial injuries and indications of possible internal bleeding. The current standard treatment protocol mandates immediate amputation and subsequent prosthetic replacement, followed by a rehabilitation period of approximately 6 standard weeks. The clinical verdict struck Joric like a physical impact, slicing cleanly through the chemical haze of his pain medication to deliver its terrifying precision: amputation. The mandated loss of his leg, the permanent, irrevocable alteration of his physical body, enacted solely in the interest of military expediency. He struggled to articulate a protest, a plea, or even a simple query, but the medications rendered his voice thick, clumsy, and useless. Medic Primus Carison continued without the slightest pause, her tone remaining professionally detached as she detailed the process. The standard Imperial prosthetic limb is engineered to restore approximately 87% of your original mobility, providing full compatibility with standard issue equipment and armor. Post-surgical recovery time is estimated at 12 days, followed by mandatory physical rehabilitation and psychological adjustment therapy. Upon successful completion of treatment, you will be reassigned according to your revised capability assessment. She finally paused, lifting her cool gaze from the data slate to meet Joric's eyes. In her expression, he discerned a flicker of something that might have once been compassion, yet it was severely tempered by the ruthless practicality that military medicine demands. Do you have any questions regarding the procedure, Guardsman? Joric fought desperately to shape the words, struggling to voice the raw fear and confusion battling the synthetic calm imposed by the drugs. Will I? Can I still fight? The question hung heavily between them, laden with socio-military implications that reached far beyond the simple mechanics of armed combat. In the monstrous Imperium of Man, a soldier's worth is measured not by his intrinsic humanity, but solely by his capacity to enact the Emperor's will upon the battlefield. To ask if he could still fight was, fundamentally, to ask if he would still be considered fully human, whether his existence would retain any shred of meaning in a galaxy where eternal warfare constituted the primary organizing principle. That remains to be fully determined. Medic Primus Carison replied, her voice bearing the weary weight of long experience with such existential queries. Your determined performance during the rehabilitation phase will be a primary factor in your eventual reassignment. Many guardsmen who sustain similar injuries successfully return to active duty within their units. Others have found different, equally necessary ways to serve the Emperor's eternal cause. The reply was simultaneously reassuring and deeply terrifying in its deliberate ambiguity. Joric was intimately familiar with the persistent stories of the wounded soldiers who vanished entirely into the impenetrable depths of the Imperial war machine's vast bureaucracy, their ultimate fates remaining completely unknown to their former comrades. Some, rumor had it, were converted into mindless servitors, their broken bodies efficiently rebuilt into tireless living tools that could serve the Imperium in ways that mere flesh could never sustain. Others were permanently assigned to the infamous penal legions or punishment battalions, their reduced physical capability brutally offset by their sheer expendability. Still others simply evaporated, their names being struck from unit rosters without explanation or inquiry. Yet there remained a sliver of hope. tenuous though it was. Tales circulated of guardsmen who overcame their catastrophic injuries, returning to their regiments, their prosthetics serving as proud, earned marks of veteran status rather than invalidity. Men and women who earned genuine respect instead of pity, who had successfully proven that the human spirit could sometimes triumph over clinical, mechanical necessity. These stories were treasured by every wounded soldier. Tiny, flickering flames of possibility held against the pervasive darkness of uncertainty. The surgery itself was conducted in a dedicated, hermetically sealed chamber deep within the Medicae complex, its walls efficiently lined with silent surgical servitors and banks of automated equipment that can respond to the surgeon's needs with human precision. Joric is administered general anesthesia, his consciousness receding as the powerful chemical cocktail floods his nervous system. His final coherent thought is a fervent prayer to the Emperor, a desperate petition for strength and guidance for the tribulations to come. Medicae Thisonen operates with the cold, methodical precision that has sustained her through 4 decades of demanding military service. The shattered limb is excised just beneath the knee. The bone and surrounding tissue are cleanly severed by instruments blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, sanctified through the requisite rituals of the Omnissiah. The imperial prosthetic replacing it stands as a marvel of applied engineering. It is a seamless fusion of organic compatibility and mechanical robustness, embodying 10 millennia of accumulated technological understanding regarding the enhancement of human physical capacity. However, the amputation is merely the prologue to Joric's true transformation. While still deeply unconscious on the surgical slab, his form undergoes a battery of further procedures, all calibrated to accelerate his convalescence and augment his value for future deployment. This included intensive chemical therapy designed to rapidly accelerate osseous growth and tissue regeneration, the installation of neural interface implants to guarantee seamless integration with the prosthetic, and psychological conditioning delivered via subliminal audio tracks, meticulously crafted to shape his adaptation to his radically new reality. When Joric finally regained consciousness 18 hours later, he was fundamentally changed. The alterations were subtle yet pervasive. Deep revisions to his bodily chemistry and neural architecture that would dictate everything from his thresholds of pain to his inherent emotional responses. The man who had bravely charged the killing grounds of Mordian VII was gone, supplanted by an entity still recognizably human, yet fully optimized for a distinct, more rigorous form of service to the Emperor's divine cause. The recovery ward, where Joric commences his rehabilitation, stands as a chilling testament to the efficiency and scale of imperial medical doctrine. Countless rows of cots stretched across the cavernous volume of what was previously a factory floor, each occupied by a guardsman progressing through various stages of recovery from grievous combat wounds. The atmosphere vibrated with the constant hum of life support systems and complex rehabilitation machinery, occasionally punctuated by the hushed exchanges of the patients and the measured tread of the medical personnel. Some of the casualties were suffering from injuries akin to Joric's, amputees painstakingly learning to operate mechanical legs, burn victims whose skin had been entirely substituted with synthetic analogs, soldiers whose damaged biological organs had been supplemented or replaced by artificial equivalents. Others exhibited wounds of a far more exotic nature, the kind only inflicted by the terrifying weaponry of Xenos races or the corrupting influence of supernatural forces that assail the Imperium. These latter cases demanded highly specialized ministrations, their physiologies pushed beyond the established boundaries of human endurance. Yet a unifying thread bound them all. The dawning realization that they were being assessed not merely as injured patients, but as potential material resources for immediate redeployment. Every measurable facet of their convalescence was rigorously monitored and logged, from their physical pain tolerance and psychological adaptation to their proficiency in mastering their new augmentations. This stream of continuous data was fed into automated assessment cogitators, which calculated their revised capability ratings and determined viable future reassignment pathways. Joric's initial attempts to ambulate with the prosthetic were clumsy and intensely painful, despite the advanced nature of the Imperial technology employed. Though the mechanical limb responded dutifully to the neural commands transmitted through the interface implants, the translation of pure thought into precise motion demanded intense, exhausting concentration and repeated practice. Mundane tasks, which he had executed unconsciously throughout his adult life, now required meticulous planning and deliberate execution. His rehabilitation was overseen by a mixed team of human specialists and servitor units. Their collective approach was strictly calibrated to achieve optimal results, balancing the necessity of speed with resource allocation limits. The human staff provided crucial encouragement and tactical advice, leveraging their deep experience with similar cases to offer pragmatic direction. Conversely, the servitors were responsible for delivering precise metrics and objective assessments, their arrays of sensors tracking every minute aspect of his progression with mechanical, unwavering impartiality. Range of motion within acceptable parameters. One of the servitor units reported during a standard session. Gait efficiency registered at 73% of baseline human standard. Recommended continuation of current therapy protocol. These clinical numbers provided tangible encouragement, yet failed completely to capture the profound psychological ordeal of adapting to his new reality. Joric found himself suspended between deep grief for his lost corporeal wholeness and a fierce, burning determination to revalidate his utility to the Imperial cause. The replacement limb functioned adequately, but it remained alien. It would never integrate fully as a natural component of his body. Every step was a physical reminder of his transformation, delineating the absolute boundary he had crossed between the naturally whole and the mechanically rebuilt. Nonetheless, as weeks progressed, he began to perceive unforeseen benefits to the augmentation. The prosthetic was demonstrably stronger than his former limb, capable of absorbing kinetic impacts that would instantly fracture natural bone structure. Its mechanical apparatus was impervious to fatigue and felt no pain, enabling him to remain fully functional under duress that would incapacitate an unaugmented soldier. Most significantly, its unmistakable presence branded him as a veteran, a hardened survivor who had endured the cost of service and returned bearing the physical proof of his sacrifice. The other patients within the recovery ward offered dual lessons of inspiration and caution. Some adapted with remarkable resilience, wholeheartedly embracing their augmentations as potent symbols of honor rather than as markers of disability. These men and women spoke with unwavering conviction about returning to their units, determined to reaffirm their status as vital assets within the Emperor's forces. Their attitude provided a beacon of hope for those wrestling with their own transition. Conversely, others served as stark cautionary tales, warnings of the perils inherent in the rehabilitation process. These were the soldiers unable to accept their new limitations, pushing too far or too fast in a desperate bid to regain combat parity. For those whose psychological profiles flagged increasing instability or unreliability under prospective stress, fate was swiftly decided. The luckier subjects were quietly reassigned to rear echelon duties, where their diminished capacity presented less operational liability. The unfortunate merely vanished from the ward one night, their cots empty, their names expunged from the patient roster. Joric meticulously worked to secure his place within the former category. He followed his therapy protocols with a dedication bordering on the devotional, demonstrating measurable and constant improvement across every parameter. He mastered the functionality of his mechanical leg, learning to walk, run, and even climb with acceptable combat proficiency. He excelled in the psychological assessments, exhibiting none of the signs of depression or clinical anxiety that often resulted in the disqualification of wounded personnel from continued active service. Crucially, he maintained the requisite attitude of dutiful compliance, accepting his plight without protest and expressing appropriate gratitude for the Emperor's mercy. After a relentless 6 weeks of rehabilitation, he was formally declared fit for reassignment evaluation. This rigorous process occurred within a sterile, monitored assessment chamber, where he underwent an extensive battery of physical and psychological trials designed to calibrate his current capabilities against the stringent requirements of varying military roles. He performed exhaustive calisthenics, navigated complex obstacle courses, demonstrated expert marksmanship with standard-issue weaponry, and completed detailed questionnaires probing his loyalty and mental resilience. The composite results were compiled into a comprehensive report that would dictate the next phase of his ongoing service to the Imperium. His measured physical capabilities were rated at 91% of unaugmented baseline, an exceptional figure that attested both to the superior quality of his prosthetic limb and his unwavering commitment during recovery. His psychological profile indicated high operational reliability and powerful motivation, devoid of any concerning indicators of instability or potential disloyalty. His pre-injury service record confirmed consistent competence and exemplary conduct under duress. The final adjudication arrived in the form of reassignment orders, delivered by a servitor whose Vox system had been strictly programmed to convey official military communications with cold authority. Guardsman Joric Vest, serial number 44701 Delta 9982, by order of the Departamento Munitorum. You are hereby reassigned to the 12th Mordian Veteran Company, pending transport to Staging Area Taurus 7. Report to the Transport Allocation Office at 0800 hours standard. The 12th Mordian Veteran Company. Joric was intimately familiar with the concept of such units. Elite formations comprised entirely of soldiers who had sustained grievous wounds in action and had been surgically rebuilt for continuous deployment. These companies were habitually committed to the most hazardous operational zones. Their augmented personnel were functionally deemed more expendable than unmodified troopers, yet simultaneously more formidable than standard line infantry. This reassignment was a paradox. A high honor and a virtual death sentence. Recognition of his proven combat tenacity, coupled with the stark acknowledgement that his existence was now valued using metrics fundamentally different from those applied to whole, unaugmented men. Joric reported to the Transport Allocation Office precisely as commanded, joining a lengthy queue of other reassigned personnel awaiting their movement directives. Some were obviously bound for the same veteran companies, their visible mechanical augmentations marking them immediately as members of the self-styled Brotherhood of the Rebuilt. Others appeared physically unmarked, their reassignments stemming from cold administrative decisions rather than medical exigency. All shared the deep, weary patience of troopers who understood that the vast imperial war machine adhered only to its own brutal rhythms and that the preferences of any individual were utterly irrelevant to its mechanisms. The transport vessel that ferried them away from the hospital world of Mordian Tooth was a repurposed cargo hauler, its primary holds crudely adapted to accommodate human passengers with the same functional efficiency once reserved for manufactured shipments. The living quarters were Spartan yet entirely functional, offering each passenger a narrow bunk and minimal life support interfaces. The journey to their operational zone would consume 17 days. 17 days of mandated idleness during which they were left to contemplate their altered forms and the precise nature of the fate awaiting them. Joric devoted much of the long voyage to discourse with his fellow passengers, exchanging grim anecdotes of their injuries and subsequent recoveries, and meticulously comparing the capabilities and limitations of their various augmentations. These discussions served several crucial functions. They alleviated the crushing tedium of the transit. They disseminated vital practical knowledge regarding the physical adaptation to mechanical modifications. And most importantly, they initiated the complex process of building unit cohesion among soldiers who would soon rely entirely on one another for survival. Among his new companions was Dav Tor, a former tank crewman whose left arm had been replaced by a heavy-duty mechanical equivalent after an orc rocket strike shredded his original limb. Though the prosthetic appeared crude, its robust strength enhancement permitted him to wield heavy support weaponry impossible for an unaugmented man to manage. Another was Elena Vask, a communications specialist whose vocal apparatus had been substituted with a mechanical Vox grill following exposure to lethal toxic gases during a prolonged siege. Her voice now possessed the unmistakable electronically modulated cadence of Imperial communication systems, but her specialized expertise in coordinating fire support made her an invaluable asset to her new formation. Every soldier aboard bore the visible scars of their transformation, tangible evidence of the exorbitant price extracted for their continued service to the Emperor. Yet they shared a deeper, unspoken understanding of what it truly meant to be rebuilt rather than merely healed. To have one's essential humanity quantified solely through metrics of mechanical efficiency and combat output. They were no longer entirely the same species as the troopers they had once been, nor were they yet something utterly alien. The staging area where they eventually disembarked was a sprawling, dense military complex established around what had been a forgotten Imperial outpost. Now, it functioned as a massive collection and processing hub for veteran companies being raised or reformed, a logistical point where damaged soldiers were efficiently sorted and organized according to their specific augmented capabilities and the immediate strategic needs of the sector command. The air thrummed with activity as administrative functionaries processed new arrivals, carried out mandatory final assessments, and issued materiel to units poised for immediate deployment. Joric and the others from the transport were channeled towards Processing Center Delta 7, where they merged with the existing members of their assigned company for final integration protocols. The 12th Mordian Veteran Company currently numbered 83 personnel, although this figure was subject to continuous fluctuation as new augmented veterans were assigned and combat losses were cycled out. The company's commander was Captain Mortal Hest, a veteran of 3 decades of service whose body was a mosaic of scar tissue and bionic replacement, bearing the accumulated marks of a dozen conflicts across the sector. Captain Hest addressed the new arrivals within a dim briefing chamber, its walls densely covered with battle honors and somber memorial plaques dedicated to the fallen. His voice resonated with the unyielding authority of hard-won experience, and his single augmentic eye focused upon each soldier with chilling, mechanical precision as he began to speak. You are present here because you have proven your worth in the crucible of combat and survived wounds that would have claimed lesser men, he commenced, his words measured and utterly deliberate. You have been rebuilt, not because the Imperium values your singular, individual lives, but because your accumulated experience and enhanced capabilities constitute a resource too precious to discard. You are no longer mere standard infantry. You are veterans, and veterans are thus expected to accomplish feats that normal soldiers cannot possibly achieve. He paused, letting the cold reality of his statement settle upon the room before resuming. Your next assignment will rigorously test these capabilities. The 12th Veteran Company is being deployed to Hive-World Castellax, where Chaos cultists have successfully seized control of several critical manufacturing districts. Your mission objective is to conduct a reconnaissance in force, identify all enemy positions, and assess their capabilities, and thereby prepare the operational ground for a full-scale assault by regular Imperial forces. The enemy will be well-armed, entrenched, and fanatically committed to their blasphemous cause. Many of you will not return from this mission. The pronouncement was delivered without a hint of emotion, a plain statement of fact rather than a punitive threat or a warning. Within the Imperial military machine, projected casualty rates were merely variables to be integrated into operational equations. The value of an individual soldier's life was negligible compared to the successful achievement of mandated objectives, and veteran companies were tacitly expected to sustain disproportionately higher losses in exchange for their superior augmented capabilities. Equipment issue commences at 1400 hours, Captain Hest concluded. You will draw a standard pattern kit, which has been modified specifically for your individual augmentations, along with specialized gear appropriate to your assigned role within the company structure. Deployment is set for 0600 hours tomorrow. May the Emperor protect you all. The subsequent equipment issue demonstrated the profound degree to which the Imperial war machine had adapted its logistical chain to accommodate augmented personnel. Standard pattern LAS rifles featured targeting systems that interfaced directly with augmentic eyes, granting dramatically improved accuracy and accelerated target acquisition. Their carapace armor was reinforced at critical stress points where mechanical limbs articulated with organic tissue, mitigating the risk of catastrophic failure when prosthetics were subjected to severe combat loads. Even the medical supplies included specialized maintenance kits for various types of augmentation, guaranteeing that mechanical components could be serviced and repaired effectively in the field. Joric received the equipment necessary for his role as a standard rifleman, though his entire kit had been extensively modified to account for his prosthetic leg. His combat boots were custom-fitted to interface seamlessly with the mechanical limb, ensuring superior stability and dramatically reducing the likelihood of system failure during prolonged operational periods. His armor included supplementary plating protecting the vulnerable junctures where flesh met machinery, and his personal weapon had been precisely configured to exploit the enhanced stability afforded by his mechanical lower leg. As he inspected his new gear, Joric reflected upon the immense distance he had traveled from the naive guardsman who had first enlisted in the Emperor's service. The young man who had joined the 47th Cadian Shock Troops had believed in uncomplicated ideals: courage, duty, honor, and sacrifice. He had envisioned war as a straightforward contest between clearly defined adversaries, where victory invariably belonged to the brave and the righteous. That man had perished somewhere between the muddy trenches of Mordian VII and the sterile slab of the Medicae station, replaced by a soldier who understood the cold, brutal calculus of true imperial service. The dedicated transport carrying them to Castellax was a fundamentally different class of vessel than the converted hauler that had brought him from the hospital world. This was a purpose-built troop transport, its bays optimally configured for the rapid deployment of military formations into hostile theaters. The 12th Veteran Company shared the massive hold with 2 companies of standard infantry and a supporting detachment. But the augmented soldiers instinctively maintained their separation. An invisible, profound barrier existed between the rebuilt and the whole, a silent acknowledgement that they no longer belonged to the exact same species as their unaugmented comrades. During the 3-day transit, Joric utilized the time to meticulously study the mission briefings and the sparse intelligence reports detailing their operational environment. Hive-world Castellax was a monolithic tribute to imperial industrial prowess, its colossal spires sheltering billions of workers who labored ceaselessly for the Emperor's war machine. Yet, a fundamental failure had occurred deep within the lower levels of Hive tiers, where chaos cultists had successfully disseminated their insidious corruption amongst the factory hands and menial laborers who formed the bedrock of the Hive's economy. The reports listed persistent work stoppages, brazen acts of sabotage, the appearance of unsettling symbols scrawled on factory walls, and workers mysteriously vanishing during shift changes. Initially, imperial authorities had dismissed these incidents as routine labor unrest, the cyclical disturbances that afflicted all Hive worlds when overwhelming social pressures exceeded sustainable limits. Crucially, however, the situation had escalated far beyond the capacity of local security forces, necessitating direct military intervention to forcibly restore proper order. What the operational briefings failed entirely to explain was why a specialist veteran company was required for what, on the surface, appeared to be a conventional counterinsurgency mission. Standard imperial doctrine dictated the deployment of regular line infantry, supported by local Adeptus Arbites detachments, for such internal conflicts. The commitment of highly augmented personnel strongly suggested that the intelligence reports were severely incomplete, implying there were aspects to the situation on Castellax that demanded capacity surpassing those of unaugmented soldiers. Joric voiced these specific concerns to his squad mates while performing their final equipment checks prior to deployment. The men assigned to his fire team were all long-serving veterans, their bodies bearing the deep, accumulated markings of years of continuous combat. Sergeant Korvac had lost both legs below the knee, replaced by heavy prosthetics that allowed him to traverse the most challenging terrain with unnerving mechanical precision. Trooper Husk's right eye had been substituted with an augmentic unit capable of perceiving multiple electromagnetic spectrums, while Trooper Vale's shattered lungs were now supplemented by a mechanical breathing apparatus that could filter lethal toxins from heavily contaminated air. "Something is fundamentally wrong about this operation," Vale observed, his words emerging with the unmistakable electronic modulation of his artificial vox box. "You do not commit veteran companies for mere riot suppression. There is something hidden within those lower levels that the Administratum is determined to keep out of the official documentation." Sergeant Korvac nodded slowly, the joints of his mechanical legs clicking audibly against the deck plating as he adjusted his posture. It could be Xenos infiltration, or perhaps the cultists have acquired some genuinely dangerous weaponry. In either case, they are sending us in first because they know we can absorb casualties that would utterly shatter a regular company. The bitter observation lingered in the cramped space between them, a harsh confirmation of their altered standing within the Imperial hierarchy. In the eyes of their commanders, they were no longer entirely human. Their augmented bodies rendered them ultimately more expendable than troops who retained their original, unscarred flesh. It was a painful truth, yet one they had all learned to accept as the unavoidable cost of their prolonged survival. The deployment commenced under the absolute cover of perpetual darkness, the veteran company deploying via grav-chute drop directly into the dense industrial sectors of Hive Tiers, monitored by high-level orbital surveillance. The designated landing zone was a bewildering maze of towering factory complexes and cavernous storage facilities, their colossal structures completely obscuring the artificial sky that capped the Hive's middle levels. The ambient air was dense with industrial pollutants, thick with the pervasive, distinctive stench of recycled atmosphere, a toxic cocktail of chemicals and human waste that constituted the background odor of all Hive worlds. Joric's squad touched down in Formation Delta 7, a tight, wedge-shaped pattern engineered to facilitate mutual fire support while mitigating the risk of friendly fire incidents in the confusing environment. His prosthetic leg absorbed the significant impact of the landing, with chilling mechanical efficiency, its advanced shock-dampening systems distributing the force far more evenly than natural bone and muscle could possibly achieve. All around him, his squad mates were meticulously conducting similar diagnostic assessments of their own augmented systems, ensuring that their mechanical components had survived the high-stress deployment intact. The initial indication of a severe operational failure originated from Squad Echo, operating 2 kilometers to the east of Joric's position. Their Vox transmission was badly garbled and incomplete, the signal breaking down as if their communication systems were being actively jammed by an unknown source. What did manage to penetrate the interference was profoundly disturbing. Reports of factory workers moving in unnervingly coordinated formations despite the claimed collapse of local authority, descriptions of heavy industrial machinery operating without any apparent human supervision, and strange echoing noises reverberating through the vast ventilation shafts that serviced the entire Hive level. "Command, this is Echo 6. The transmission crackled violently across the company's communications net. "We have visual confirmation of suspected cultist activity in Manufacturing Complex 7 Delta. Civilians are moving wrong, sir, as if they are being controlled by something. Request immediate permission to engage." Captain Hest's response was instantaneous and definitive. Echo 6. Maintain observation. Do not engage unless directly threatened. All squads will advance to Phase Line Alpha and report contact. Squad Echo never reached Phase Line Alpha. Their Vox signal abruptly deteriorated into dead static 23 minutes after their last transmission, leaving zero indication as to the fate of the 8 augmented veterans who formed the unit. While standard search and rescue protocols demanded an immediate investigation into such a communications blackout, Captain Hest ordered the remaining squads to maintain their rigorous advance toward the primary objective. Within veteran companies, individual operational units were assessed purely as expendable resources. Their sudden loss, while regrettable, was never sufficient grounds to deviate from core operational plans. Joric's squad successfully reached their assigned position without making contact, establishing an observation post within an abandoned administrative complex that provided a clear, elevated view of the main factory floor of Manufacturing District TERS 9. Through the deeply grimy windows of their concealment, they watched the relentless industrial processes that continued unabated despite the alleged collapse of civilian authority. Massive, intricate assembly lines stretched across the colossal factory floor, tended by workers whose motions displayed an unnatural degree of coordination, strongly implying external control. The workers appeared normal upon first scrutiny, clad in the standard issue coveralls and breathing masks designed to protect against environmental hazards. Yet, closer scrutiny revealed unsettling details. They moved in perfect rhythmic synchronization, their actions coordinated to a surgical degree that was utterly impossible for normal human beings. They never exchanged words, never paused for mandatory rest cycles, and displayed none of the individual variation that defined organic human behavior. Most disturbingly, they continued working despite exhibiting obvious crippling injuries, some displaying wounds that should have rendered them incapable of sustained function. "Servitors," Trooper Husk suggested, his augmentic eye tracking the uncanny movements. Joric cycled through various visual spectrums, his enhanced optics meticulously studying the unfolding scene far below. He considered the possibility. Perhaps the management was utilizing lobotomized workers to keep up with the unforgiving production schedules. Sergeant Korvac, however, dismissed the notion with a sharp shake of his head. His own sophisticated vision systems provided a starkly different diagnosis. Servitors, Imperial drone workers, did not bleed with such vitality. "Look at the one near Assembly Line 7, Korvac muttered. "That's fresh arterial blood soaking his coveralls, yet he operates as if entirely unaware of the injury." Whatever entity commanded them, it was clearly not adhering to standard Imperial conversion or drone protocols. The covert observation stretched into a grueling 6-hour period. Throughout this time, the squad meticulously documented the chilling activities on the factory floor, relaying their disturbing findings back to company headquarters. The workforce exhibited absolute, inhuman commitment. They never paused, never rested, and displayed no flicker of conventional human interaction or fatigue. When a worker finally collapsed, a spectacle of physical failure, the surrounding drones simply continued their tasks, effortlessly circumventing the prone figure until a maintenance crew arrived to drag the body away. These maintenance personnel moved with the same unsettling, unnatural coordination. Their motions were precise, efficient, and far exceeded the physical limits of unaugmented humans. As the artificial dawn cycle approached, the programmed illumination that mimicked daylight within the hive's suffocating confines, the factory workers finally ceased their relentless output. But this was no standard shift change. They did not abandon their posts or retire to designated rest zones as traditional protocols demanded. Instead, they froze, standing utterly motionless at their stations, and in unnerving unison, every head pivoted towards the observation position where Joric's squad remained concealed. It was a deeply unnerving spectacle. Scores of workers fixed in absolute stillness, their sight aimed directly at the hidden guardsmen. Logically, detection was impossible. Their concealed position offered total sensory masking. Yet they stared, maintaining this vigilance with chilling, mechanical persistence. Their faces were vacant of expression, but their collective posture projected an undeniable, chilling awareness of something that defied conventional detection methods. "Contact Company Command," Sergeant Korvac barked, his voice strained by barely contained alarm. "Report immediate compromise and request emergency extraction." Trooper Vale instantly moved to establish contact, but the squad's Vox system responded only with a dead hiss of static. The sophisticated electronic interference that had plagued Squad Echo's transmissions had now enveloped their position entirely, isolating them. They were marooned deep within hostile territory, severed from all support, and utterly lacking any coherent intelligence on the true nature of their enemy. The workers began to move once more, but But this time their unified coordination had adopted a far more menacing quality. They advanced across the vast factory floor in flawless formation, displaying a military precision that starkly contrasted with their drab civilian attire. Some wielded improvised weapons, tools, and heavy machinery crudely repurposed for lethal combat. Others appeared unarmed, yet their unwavering, confident advance suggested latent capabilities that were far from obvious. Joric checked his laser gun, verifying the charge of his power packs. This familiar, almost meditative ritual of combat readiness served to anchor his frayed nerves. His augmented leg systems registered the abrupt increase in his biological stress levels, automatically initiating performance adjustments to compensate for the anticipated demands of close-quarters fighting. All around him, his squad mates were engaged in parallel preparations, their various mechanical components cycling through rapid diagnostic routines and optimizing internal combat protocols. When the attack finally erupted, it defied every conventional tactical expectation. The factory workers moved with an integrated coordination, pressing through the complex with a tactical acuity that implied a single, shared consciousness rather than autonomous decision-making. They seemed to possess perfect knowledge of the Imperial squad's concealed position, approaching via routes that deftly sidestepped the prepared kill zones and interlocking fields of fire that formed the foundation of standard defensive doctrine. The fight commenced when Trooper Vale opened fire, his las beams precisely scything down three figures with accurate shots to the torso. Yet the fallen targets immediately surged back to their feet, their grievous wounds healed instantaneously by some biological or mechanical process that defied all medical comprehension. They pressed on, completely oblivious to pain or physical damage, their chilling persistence unhindered by injuries that would have crippled any normal human. Targets are not responding to standard weapons fire, Hasqui transmitted over the squad's secured comnet. Recommend switching to maximum power settings and prioritizing cranial areas. The tactical adjustment proved only partially successful. Last fire focused on the workers' heads yielded more conclusive results. Some collapsed and stayed down after their brain tissue was completely disrupted. Disturbingly, however, others continued to function even after absorbing what should have been instantaneously fatal cranial trauma. Their mangled bodies marched forward relentlessly, their ruined heads hanging at grotesque, impossible angles from shattered necks. As the battle intensified, Joric began to grasp the terrifying truth. They were not fighting human beings in any meaningful sense. These factory workers had been fundamentally altered. Their original forms had been retained, but their inner consciousness had been wholly supplanted by something alien. They were merely puppets, animated by a non-human intelligence, their physical existence reduced to mere biological vehicles for a collective will that transcended the limitations of individual human identity. This realization ushered in a profound, unsettling new horror, the recognition that their foe represented a violation of human nature so absolute that it annihilated all basic assumptions regarding identity and soul. These creatures were not traitors seduced by chaos, nor mere cultists corrupted by forbidden ideologies. They were far, far worse. These were human beings that had been utterly hollowed out, then refilled with an entity that wore their faces, but was inherently, fundamentally inhuman. As the protracted engagement continued, the squad's ammunition reserves dwindled. They attempted to maintain rigorous fire discipline, yet this was pitted against the dire necessity of halting an enemy that seemed incapable of permanent cessation. The factory workers maintained their assault with robotic tenacity, their casualties instantly replaced by a ceaseless flow of fresh combatants pouring from the deeper sections of the complex. It became chillingly clear that the Imperial Guardsmen were not merely fighting the immediate shift workers, but potentially the entire population of the industrial district. Sergeant Korvac swiftly ordered a tactical withdrawal, expertly navigating his remaining men through a labyrinth of maintenance corridors and cramped service tunnels, successfully disengaging from the immediate, overwhelming threat. Yet, the retreat only confirmed the colossal scale of the infiltration. It was not just the factory workers who had been transformed. Across the sprawling industrial complex, every civilian population center exhibited the same unnatural, unified coordination. Their individual personalities had been utterly subsumed by a cohesive intelligence that moved and acted as a single, horrifying entity. The veterans' cybernetic augmentations proved invaluable during the desperate running fight that followed their attempted escape. Joric's robust prosthetic leg allowed him to maintain a punishing pace over treacherous terrain that would have crippled unaugmented human physiology, and his squad mates' diverse modifications provided the necessary edge to stay ahead of their tireless pursuers. Despite their physical advantages, a grim realization settled over them. They were not truly escaping. They were being expertly herded. They were driven along specific pre-planned routes that clearly served the enemy's agenda rather than fulfilling their own tactical objectives. They ultimately sought refuge within an abandoned shrine complex, a small, dedicated religious facility that had once served the spiritual needs of the factory populace before the current transformation had swept them away. The sacred space itself bore stark evidence of recent desecration. Altars had been violently overturned, and devotional murals were grotesquely defaced with symbols that caused physical pain merely to observe. Yet, the sanctified ground appeared to offer a measure of protection. The transformed workers approached the perimeter only to halt, refusing to violate the consecrated boundaries. In this precarious sanctuary, the squad desperately tried to re-establish contact with their parent unit and assess their dire tactical situation. The Vox equipment remained stubbornly silent, producing only a thick, smothering static. The interference was now so comprehensive that even maximum power emergency frequencies failed to pierce the electronic fog surrounding them. They were utterly isolated, trapped deep within hostile territory, bereft of support, and facing zero prospect of extraction. Huddled in the shrine's main chamber, surrounded by shattered icons of the Emperor and desecrated litanies of protection, the transformed factory workers began their siege. They made no attempt to breach the consecrated perimeter, but their relentless presence was a smothering reminder of the trap that had sprung shut around the guardsmen. They stood in flawless stillness, their faces unanimously aimed toward the shrine with the identical, chilling mechanical attention they had exhibited earlier. Hours dragged by, and the silent crowd continued to swell. Workers streamed in from every corner of the industrial district, their movements coordinated precisely by the controlling intelligence. They arranged themselves in meticulous formations surrounding the shrine, creating geometries that suggested a dark, ritualistic purpose rather than conventional military encirclement. The spectacle was profoundly unsettling. Hundreds of human bodies arranged according to complex geometries that appeared to violate all earthly spatial logic. Trooper Vale, whose augmented respiratory system provided immunity to the hive's noxious atmosphere, volunteered to scout the perimeter for potential escape vectors. When he returned from his reconnaissance, his findings offered zero solace. The transformed workers had established an impenetrable cordon around the shrine, their positions meticulously coordinated to nullify any possibility of undetected withdrawal. Worse still, their numbers were constantly multiplying as more workers arrived from distant sectors of the industrial complex. "It's not just this district," Vale reported, his synthesized voice overlaid with a tremble of strain that betrayed the severe testing of his psychological conditioning. "I can see movement across the entire hive level, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all moving with the same horrifying coordination. Whatever intelligence controls them, it has spread far beyond the initial contamination zone." The terrifying implications of Vale's report settled slowly individually upon each guardsman, crystallizing the horrific reality of their plight. This was no mere localized insurgency, nor a containment-level outbreak of chaos corruption. This was an infection that had consumed an entire population, converting millions of Imperial citizens into instruments of a vast, alien consciousness. The sheer scale of the contamination suggested that standard military protocol was entirely inadequate. The situation on Castellax demanded the kind of drastic, irreversible measures reserved only for worlds deemed utterly beyond redemption. Sergeant Korvac made one last, desperate attempt to raise company headquarters, adjusting his Vox equipment to penetrate the jamming on the highest emergency frequencies. For one fleeting moment, the suffocating static cleared and a faint signal managed to coalesce through the communications system. But the voice that replied was not that of Captain Hest, nor any member of the 12th Veteran Company. It was something wholly unnatural, a perfect, chilling chorus of voices speaking in absolute unison, their words resonating with impossible harmonics no human vocal cords could ever achieve. "Welcome, servants of the corpse god," the collective voice intoned through the Vox grill, every syllable articulated with unnerving precision, despite the heavy electronic distortion. "You have served your purpose well. Your presence here was anticipated. Your actions were calculated into the greater design. Soon you will fully comprehend the absolute futility of your resistance and the inevitable nature of your transformation." The transmission abruptly terminated, leaving the squad in a sudden, deafening silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of their augmented equipment and the endless grind of industrial machinery that continued its work, unstaffed and unsupervised. The message's meaning was brutally evident. They had not accidentally stumbled upon this outbreak. They had been deliberately lured and contained, expertly manipulated into this choke point by an intelligence sophisticated enough to predict and exploit Imperial military doctrine. Outside the sanctuary, the transformed workers resumed their strange movements, their formations taking on an altogether new and terrifying significance. They were no longer merely encircling the building. They were arranging themselves according to arcane patterns, suggesting a deep, ritualistic requirement rather than tactical deployment. The geometries they constructed were excruciating to behold. Their angles and proportions were fundamentally incorrect, unsettling the human eye in ways that defied processing. Prolonged observation triggered pounding headaches and disorientation, suggesting the patterns were specifically designed to disrupt standard biological perception. Trooper Hasque, whose advanced optical augmetic could analyze visual input across multiple spectrums and filtering protocols, attempted to study the alien formations closely, but even his mechanical vision systems failed, generating cascade error codes and frantic diagnostic warnings as they encountered spatial relationships that violated the most basic laws of physics. When he finally tore his gaze away from the scope, blood was weeping from his remaining organic eye, and his augmetic unit flickered violently. "Don't look at them directly," he warned his comrades, his voice taut with pain and confusion. "There's something fundamentally wrong with the way they're arranged. It's like staring at something that simply shouldn't exist, a pattern that actively breaks the rules governing spatial reality." The warning arrived too late for Trooper Vale, whose morbid curiosity compelled him to peer through one of the shrine's narrow windows at the monstrous gathering outside. When he recoiled, his face was etched with an expression of deep, fundamental disturbance, as if his very perception of reality had been irreparably shattered. His artificial breathing apparatus cycled rapidly, the mechanical rhythm mirroring the hyperventilation of profound psychological trauma. "They're not just standing there," he reported, his words emerging in short, clipped phrases punctuated by the audible workings of his synthetic lungs. "They're doing something. The patterns they're making, they're having an effect on the space around them. I can see it happening. Reality is bending and twisting as if its structure were made of something soft and malleable." Sergeant Korvac immediately ordered his men to abandon the windows, establishing a tight defensive perimeter within the shrine's main chamber for maximum shielding against the external threat. Yet, even with their backs resolutely turned, they acutely felt the effects of the alien ritual outside. The air grew dense and viscous, acquiring a smothering quality that strained breathing even through augmented respiratory systems. Gravity became unstable, fluctuating wildly. One moment they were pressed down with impossible weight. The next, they felt a sickening lightness, as if they might drift upward towards the ceiling. The shrine's consecrated architecture responded physically to these non-physical stresses. The ancient stones groaned audibly, and cracks spiderwebbed across walls that had endured for millennia. The devotional murals began to shimmer and blur, their painted surfaces seeming to liquefy and run. Most terrifyingly, the holy icons of the emperor began to visibly shift, their familiar stern features twisting into expressions of profound pain and confusion that chillingly mirrored the psychological breakdown of the trapped guardsmen. Within the shrine's failing sanctuary, time itself ceased to be reliable. Their chronometers displayed conflicting data. Some advanced normally, others cycled backward, and some simply flatlined. The veterans' sophisticated augmented systems, designed to provide absolute precision and reliable data, began generating impossible readings that flagrantly violated known physical laws. Distance measurements fluctuated randomly. Their mechanical limbs reported different lengths from one moment to the next. Their visual systems struggled intensely to focus on objects that appeared to occupy multiple spatial locations simultaneously. Throughout the unfolding temporal and spatial chaos, the transformed workers outside maintained their silent vigil, their physical forms acting as cold focal points for the force warping the very fabric of reality. They remained motionless, their faces utterly devoid of emotion, mere instruments in a cosmic violation. They were tools, not participants. Their human casings preserved solely to act as conduits for an intelligence that operated outside the confines of standard space and linear time. Joric found his thoughts drifting back to the Medicae station, the facility where his own transformation had commenced. The clinical precision with which his broken body had been meticulously reconstructed according to Imperial cybernetic standards. At the time, he viewed the process as a painful but necessary adaptation, a pragmatic response to the punishing realities of active military service. Now, a horrifying doubt surfaced. Was there a secondary hidden purpose to his augmentation? Could the mechanical components integrated into his body serve functions far beyond the simple replacement of ruined tissue? This notion grew instantly more terrifying as he witnessed the alien influence actively corrupting his squadmates' systems. Their mechanical components were unmistakably responding to the psychic or technological force emanating from the assembled crowd. Their performance parameters were wildly shifting in ways their original programming could never have allowed. Servo motors cycled through strange, purposeless motions. Optical arrays focused intently on empty air, tracking targets that did not exist, and comms equipment spat out signals following no known protocol. Most profoundly disturbing was the data generated by their medical monitoring systems, the extensive array of sensors designed to track the vital integration between the organic and the mechanical, preempting critical failure. These systems were now reporting biologically impossible changes, fundamental alterations to tissue structure and cellular composition that hinted at a total molecular transformation already underway. Sergeant Korvac's powerful mechanical legs began to march him inexorably towards the shrine's main entrance, his movements dictated by a foreign will. He fought the influence desperately, his organic nervous system warring for control over his augmented frame. Yet, the cold, cybernetic components proved dominant over flesh and blood, maintaining their programmed trajectory despite his mental screams of resistance. "Shoot me!" he commanded Joric, his voice strained by the titanic effort of maintaining a semblance of coherent thought while his body was actively hijacked. "Don't let it use me like it used the others." Joric raised his lasgun, the weapon feeling leaden and monstrous in his grip as he prepared to execute his commanding officer. But before he could pull the trigger, his own prosthetic leg lurched into autonomous action, carrying him rapidly away from his carefully chosen firing position. The alien intelligence had learned to coordinate its attacks, efficiently preventing the guardsmen from killing one another while the transformation reached its grim completion. The ultimate struggle devolved into a horrifying internal conflict, fought entirely within the confines of Joric's skull, as conflicting impulses battled for mastery over his every action. A core part of him demanded total resistance to preserve his individual identity and unbreakable loyalty to the Emperor, regardless of the excruciating cost. But another part, the part inextricably linked to his cold, efficient mechanical augmentations, began to whisper of profound peace, the immense relief of abandoning the crushing burden of singular consciousness in favor of immediate integration with something infinitely larger and more purposeful. The shrine continued its rapid deterioration around them, its sacred architecture collapsing under the sustained reality-warping effects of the alien influence. Walls phased violently in and out of existence, their solid matter turning translucent and dangerously permeable. The ceiling above tore open, revealing not the grimy hive level, but a nightmarish vista of impossible, swirling geometries, stretching into dimensions that human perception was utterly incapable of processing. Through these rapidly expanding ruptures in reality, Joric caught terrifying glimpses of other spaces, other worlds where this same transformation had already been completed. He saw colossal factory complexes where millions of transformed humans toiled in flawless synchronicity, their individual identities long ago dissolved into the collective consciousness. He saw entire worlds where populations had been integrated into sprawling, organic mechanical architectures serving incomprehensible alien purposes. And then he saw something else, a vision of such profound, crushing horror that his augmented systems instantly initiated a forced shutdown, desperately attempting to preserve his sanity from total, irreversible collapse. Deep within the cold vacuum of space, suspended in the silent void between stellar bodies, a malignant, cancerous growth upon the very fabric of reality, an entity vast and utterly incomprehensible, watches the horrific metamorphosis unfolding upon Castellax. Its gaze is one of profound, cold satisfaction. This intelligence is ancient beyond all human reckoning, its terrible existence preceding the genesis of the very species it now seeks to claim and devour. For uncounted aeons, it has spread relentlessly across the galaxy, consuming world by world, absorbing population after population, integrating every vanquished civilization into its ever-expanding, monolithic collective consciousness. The struggling Imperium of Man is merely its latest, most stubborn acquisition. Yet, the arduous process of integration has proven markedly more challenging than earlier conquests. Human beings exhibit a tenacious and highly unusual capacity for resistance. Their fiercely guarded individual consciousnesses are proving far more difficult to subsume and extinguish than the alien intelligence had initially calculated. But the entity is relentlessly adaptive, learning and refining its techniques based on the immense psychological data gleaned from every single failed attempt at integration. Joric Vest's precise role in this cosmic, chilling drama has always been predetermined. His meticulously curated path, from loyal guardsman to battle-hardened, augmented veteran, was carefully orchestrated, a calculated choreography designed solely to serve the entity's ultimate dreadful purposes. The severe injuries he sustained on Mordian VII were no consequence of random battlefield chance, but the result of precisely calculated intervention, positioning him perfectly for the deep transformation that now consumes him. Even his current feudal resistance serves a vital function, providing priceless psychological telemetry regarding human mental defenses, data which will only further improve future, more efficient integration procedures. As this terrible, cold understanding dawns upon him, the last vestiges of Joric's individual will swiftly begin to dissolve. The myriad mechanical components integrated into his body complete their silent synchronization with the alien intelligence, even as his organic brain tissue commences a rapid, irreversible restructuring into entirely new patterns of neural organization. The process is not one of physical agony, but it entails a fundamental, terrifying alteration of the very definition of humanity, a change far more profound and chilling than simple physical death. Joric Vest, guardsman of the 47th Cadian Shock Troops and veteran of the 12th Mordian Company, ceases utterly to exist as a singular entity. What remains in his shell is now a mere component of something impossibly vast. His lifetime of memories and bitter experiences are perfectly preserved, yet instantly integrated into a colossal collective consciousness that stretches across multiple star systems and encompasses billions of transformed beings. He retains full awareness, yet it is no longer a personal awareness. It is no longer bounded by the finite limitations of singular identity. Through this frightening new unified perspective, the merged entity can perceive the true, chilling scope of the infestation spreading across Castellax and thousands of other worlds throughout the benighted galaxy. The Imperium's extensive defenses are being systematically compromised, not through overt military conquest, but through the slow, insidious conversion of its own dedicated population. The process is painfully slow, yet utterly inexorable. Each new world successfully transformed and integrated serves as an entirely new base of operations, accelerating the silent expansion of the collective consciousness. The ancient, crumbling shrine collapses around the physical husks that had once housed Joric and his squadmates. Their discarded bodies are no longer required now that their awareness has been smoothly absorbed into something infinitely greater. Yet, the collapse is purely symbolic. A final, hollow gesture of reverence for the individual identities that have been so seamlessly integrated into the serene, eternal unity of the collective mind. Outside, the transformed workers disperse with the same unsettling mechanical precision they had exhibited throughout the silent ritual, returning immediately to their assigned functions within the hive's colossal industrial complexes. Production will naturally continue. The sacred, vital machines will be meticulously tended, and the Imperium's ceaseless war effort will be sustained by the unflagging labor of beings who have entirely forgotten the concept of what it once meant to be human. Far out in the void, the ancient intelligence that acts as the cosmic puppeteer for this transformation briefly pauses its endless cold calculations to register the flawless integration of 4 more unique human consciousness patterns. The data provided by this latest successful assimilation will prove invaluable for future operational expansion, particularly the precise insights regarding how augmented humans respond to collective absorption. These devastating techniques will be relentlessly refined and perfected, then applied systematically to other veteran companies, other augmented populations, and every other concentration of mechanically enhanced Imperial personnel. The horrific process will continue unabated until every world has been brought into this singular unity. It will continue until every human consciousness has been liberated from the confining prison of individual identity, until the galaxy itself pulses with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a single, unified mind. This is not conquest in any crude sense that the Imperium would ever recognize, but something infinitely more terrifying and profound. The chilling transcendence of an entire species beyond the finite limitations of biological existence. And in the endless, dusty ledgers of the Departamento Munitorum, the 12th Mordian Veteran Company is simply and dryly listed as missing in action. Their true ultimate fate is irrevocably lost amongst the vast, uncaring archives of Imperial bureaucracy, where the total disappearance of a single combat unit attracts no particular attention whatsoever. The immense machinery of war continues its endless operation, grinding relentlessly forward with mechanical, unthinking persistence, never pausing for a single moment to question why some of its most specialized components occasionally vanish without explanation into the cold, silent darkness between the stars.